In 1877, the richest man in America died alone in a rented room, surrounded by nurses he didn't trust, whispering orders no one followed anymore. His fortune was worth more than the United States Treasury. His children barely visited. When they read the will, they discovered he'd structured it like a weapon designed to control them even after death. Cornelius Vanderbilt spent 83 years winning every battle he fought, but somewhere along the way, he stopped being able to tell the difference between an enemy and everyone else. He was born poor in 1794 on Staten Island in a wooden house that smelled like salt and rotting fish. His father ran a ferry. The work was brutal, and the money wasn't real money, not the kind that changed anything. Cornelius was large for his age, physically strong, and he noticed early that being loud and aggressive made people nervous. That nervousness could be used. At 16, he borrowed $100 from his mother to buy a small boat. He undercut every other ferry operator on price, worked longer hours, rowed harder, and made it clear that if you competed with him, he'd make sure you regretted it. Within 2 years, he controlled the local ferry business. He didn't celebrate, he just found the next thing to dominate. What drove him wasn't greed in the way people think of greed. It was something colder. He believed the world was a machine where weak parts got replaced. If you weren't the one doing the replacing, you were the part. That thought terrified him, so he made himself unmovable. He learned early that mercy was expensive and that people mistook ruthlessness for strength. He let them believe it. It worked. By his 20s, he'd moved into steamboats. The industry was chaotic, unregulated, full of small operators barely surviving. Vanderbilt saw opportunity in the chaos. He didn't try to outbuild anyone. He out-intimidated them. He would enter a route, slash prices to unsustainable levels, and simply wait. Other owners would bleed money until they sold out or collapsed. Then he'd raise prices again. It wasn't illegal, it was just efficient. When competitors complained, he'd offer them a deal, pay him to stay away. Many did. He called it bonus money. It was extortion with a contract, but it worked. And working mattered more than what people called it. The strategy made him rich, but it also made him something else, paranoid. He started seeing betrayal everywhere because betrayal was everywhere. Business partners tried to cut him out. Employees stole from him. His own brother sued him. Vanderbilt responded by trusting no one. He ran everything himself, checked every ledger, showed up unannounced at docks and offices, fired people for mistakes that weren't mistakes, just tests. He built an empire, but the foundation was suspicion, and suspicion doesn't retire. His family life reflected this. He married young to a cousin named Sophia. She was quiet, religious, and increasingly irrelevant to him. He had 13 children, but he treated them like investments that weren't performing. His eldest son, Cornelius Jeremiah, was sensitive, struggled with gambling and epilepsy, and couldn't meet his father's expectations. Vanderbilt didn't try to understand him, he just wrote him off, publicly. He called him weak, cut him out of business conversations, and made it clear he was a disappointment. When Cornelius Jeremiah eventually killed himself, Vanderbilt's response was brief. He attended the funeral. He didn't cry. He went back to work. There was one son he believed in, William, not because William was brilliant, but because William was obedient. Vanderbilt spent decades testing him, humiliating him, dangling approval just out of reach. William endured it all because the alternative was being erased like his brother. This is what winning looked like inside the Vanderbilt house. A father who measured love in submission. A son who learned that survival meant becoming invisible until called upon. In the 1860s, Vanderbilt made his largest move. He was nearly 70, an age when most men stepped back. He went forward. He sold his steamship empire and bought railroads. People thought he was insane. Railroads were considered dying technology, plagued by corruption and debt. Vanderbilt saw something else: consolidation. The industry was fragmented, dozens of small lines that didn't connect, didn't cooperate, couldn't scale. He started buying them one by one, forcing mergers, eliminating redundancies. He built the New York Central Railroad into a machine that moved goods faster and cheaper than anyone else. It made him the richest man in the country. It also made him the most hated. Because his method never changed, if a rival line wouldn't sell, he'd build a competing route and bankrupt them. If a city wouldn't give him tax breaks, he'd reroute traffic and watch their economy collapse. He controlled transportation, which meant he controlled access, and he knew it. When New York politicians tried to regulate him, he threatened to stop all freight into the city. They backed down. Power, he learned, wasn't about being liked. It was about being necessary. But necessity is a lonely position. His wife Sophia died in 1868. They'd been married nearly 50 years. He barely mentioned her after the funeral. He remarried within months to a woman 50 years younger than him, Frank Crawford. People whispered it was grotesque. He didn't care what people whispered. Frank was young, alive, distracting. Maybe he thought proximity to youth could delay his own decay. It didn't. He was getting older, slower, and the thing he couldn't control was time. The fear that drove him early, the terror of being replaced, started to morph into something worse, the fear of irrelevance. He'd spent his entire life building, and now he realized the thing he'd built didn't need him anymore. The railroads ran without his presence. His fortune grew passively. He'd made himself obsolete by succeeding too completely. So he tightened his grip. He micromanaged, second-guessed, refused to delegate. The harder he held on, the more the people around him pulled away. Not because they didn't respect his power, because they couldn't breathe near it. In his final years, he became obsessed with his legacy. Not the human legacy, the financial one. He spent months drafting his will, a document that was less inheritance and more continued control. He left almost everything to William, not out of love, but out of logic. William had proven he could be controlled. The other children received comparatively nothing. He justified it as protecting the fortune from being diluted, but really it was one last act of dominance. Even in death, he'd decide who mattered. When he finally died in January 1877, the public reaction was complicated. He was mourned as a titan of industry, praised for building the infrastructure that powered a growing nation. But privately, his children didn't weep. They calculated. The will sparked lawsuits, resentment, a family fracture that never healed. The fortune he'd protected so obsessively became the thing that tore them apart. And William, the loyal son, inherited everything, and then spent the rest of his life trying to prove he wasn't just his father's shadow. He died 8 years later, exhausted, having doubled the fortune, but lost something else in the process. Vanderbilt won every fight. He died richer than almost anyone in history. But at the end, in that rented room, giving orders no one needed to follow, you have to wonder what he thought he'd won. He'd erased rivals, outlasted competitors, bent industries to his will. But he'd also erased intimacy, trust, and the possibility of being known as anything other than dangerous. His children feared him, his peers avoided him, his fortune outlived him, but the man himself left almost no warmth behind, no stories of kindness, no moments where power paused long enough for connection. Maybe that was the cost he understood and accepted. Maybe he looked at the trade and decided it was worth it. Or maybe in those final moments, he realized the thing he'd been running from his whole life, insignificance, had caught him anyway. Because legacy isn't the same as being remembered. And being powerful isn't the same as mattering. He built an empire, But he died alone, and the empire didn't notice.